All right, welcome everyone. My name is Joy Cortina. I'm the founder of Life of Joy Foundation, and I'm just really glad to have all of you here with us today for our first Life of Joy Builder event, our first virtual event, and to welcome one of our Life of Joy builders, Sal Scatino. We consider him a wellness partner of ours. He serves on our wellness advisory team and is a licensed psychotherapist with Community Mental Health Associates and is based right out of here in Millersville. And so just really want to thank you, Sal, for joining with us in this effort and for just donating your time and all your knowledge and expertise. We're just really glad to have you. And just kind of a few quick housekeeping notes for those who are maybe watching the recording of this is that as you go through here, if there's any questions that pop up, you will have the opportunity to either comment when we post this on our social media pages, or you can also just email us through the different platforms. So just know that you will have a chance to have questions answered if you are not tuning in live. But for those of us who are on with us live, thanks so much for taking some time out. We really hope this is valuable for you. And do just want to encourage, this event, of course, is free. So thank you again, Sal, for your donation of time. But if you do find this valuable and you are in the position and are willing and able to contribute to our spring fundraiser, which is our Rise Up campaign, that is going to be an option that you can do after you tune in here. And just really want to thank you in advance for any support on that as we ourselves as a foundation adjust to everything that's going on and try to go to plan B. So with that, Sal, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take the reins. So thanks so much.
Well, I can't thank you enough. I want to start off by giving you some homage here to thank you for giving me this platform, this opportunity to talk about this, right? With everything that's going on right now, with all the uncertainty in our environment, I'm just going to say it bluntly, with the coronavirus, right? There's a lot of changing things that are happening. We don't know exactly what's happening currently. We don't know what this is going to look like in the future. We don't know the prognosis of everything. So what I want to do is I want to present some information we can do on the mental health front. Right? When we're presented with something that is wildly out of our norm, what happens is our brain perceives that and interprets it as a crisis. And if that crisis isn't managed, what happens is it turns into a traumatic event for our brain. And if it turns into trauma, what happens is it starts becoming more perverse into our life, and it starts to create dysfunction for ourselves, for our loved ones, right? And we're all going through this on the, everyone individually is perceiving this situation differently. That's the thing about trauma, is that no two brains will interpret the situation the same way. That's why today, part of my talk, I want to give you guys basically a short version as to what symptoms and warning signs of trauma, of acute stress disorder, and just normal responses to big life changes or adverse experiences, just so we know what it looks like to better understand if our kids are experiencing it, if we're experiencing it, or friends, family, coworkers, anyone in our lives of the sort. All right, so I want to start the talk by kind of giving an idea or a premise as to what anxiety does. Right, when a crisis comes, you're going to have a high anxiety response to these situations. It's just how our survival brain works, right? Stress basically gives us the metric as to how to cope with what's happening in our environment. The stress will turn into an emotion, and that emotion will turn into language in the brain, and then that language will create an action. So what we want to do is we want to find the different sources of the physiological response, the emotional response, and the language response to better understand what we can do about it in the moment and how do we take care of ourselves after the fact. Right. So what I do as a therapist, I specialize in trauma and adjustment disorders. So what that means is I help people pivot and transition from tragedy, from victim mindset, from despair, from helplessness and hopelessness, to growth, to resiliency, to lessons and messages that we can take from those difficult times moving forward instead of basically defining ourselves from them, right? How we can create a platform of growth and forward movement for ourselves. All right, so first off, what I'm going to be talking about, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, are the warning signs and the symptoms of acute stress disorder, normal stress response, and PTSD. I want you to see the flow, right? Because it's going to start with your normal interpretation of stress and trauma to acute stress disorder and the signs and symptoms, and then PTSD. I want you to get a nice view as that fluid movement so we can detect whether we're experiencing it or our loved ones are. Next, I want to talk about how to manage what we can control and what we can't. I know it sounds very simple and elementary, but the reason I want to be crystal clear about this is because a lot of times we take responsibility for things in our environment, in our situation, in our society that we don't have to, right? Because that a lot of times it puts too much on our plate when we already have a full plate, especially with everything that's going on and all the changes that we're experiencing currently, right? Because when the brain meets a crisis event or situation, it has three interpretations. It's responsibility, what I did or what I am going to do, lack of security, lack of safety, right? And then lack of control. So those three different paradigms is how our brain basically makes sense of what's happening in front of us. And a lot of times, if we do not have control over certain things that we're trying to take control of, it's going to create high levels of anxiety, arousal, stress, and then it starts seeping into other facets of our life. And that's where we want to start creating some awareness and mindful techniques and strategies so it doesn't create perversion and dysfunction in other parts. And actually two more things, sorry. Next, learning how to regulate our emotions. Right now we have miscalibrated emotions and we're given this flood of information. So what I mean by miscalibrated emotion is that the way in which our brain interprets the environment is through the emotion that we get, kind of like I said earlier. So if we don't have the threat clear and concise in front of us, right, that threat is still evolving, it's still changing, we're still learning things about it, our brain will try to attach itself to those changing things that we don't have any control or understanding over just yet. And when we do that, we start to direct our focus towards things outside of our locus of power and control. And when that happens, we start to feel helpless and hopeless, right? We create a learned helplessness. So what I want to teach you today is just a quick little strategy on how to regulate and stabilize our emotions for ourselves and our family. And lastly, what we can do at home. Right now, we have a lot of time on our hands. And time on our hands can mean a lot of idle time. And that idle time, especially for kids, teens, young adults, adults in general as well, though, is it opens up our mind to overthinking and overanalyzing the present situation of the coronavirus, right? It's a lot of times we'll get engulfed and we'll get attached and obsessed with the news and media. So how can we distract ourselves when it's necessary and then take time to actually sit with the feelings, emotions, and what's happening and having that conversation dialogue like we're doing today, when it's appropriate to do that and then when it's appropriate to distract. So I'm just going to hop right into it. So the different levels of trauma. The first one's our normal response. So the normal response basically just looks like high levels of stress, maybe a bit of panic and anxiety that is out of the norm for us because you're experiencing something that's out of the norm. We haven't dealt with the coronavirus before, a virus such as this. This is very alien to what we're used to and a lot of the people in the medical field are used to, right? So it's normal to have that response. There's high levels of stress, maybe some like overthinking and overanalyzing. But if it persists more than a week, then it no longer becomes just the normal response. It starts to turn into acute stress. And acute stress falls off of three different criteria. One, re-experiencing. So that's overthinking, overanalyzing, and it's flashbacks. So, when this was first brought on to the newsreels, we saw some wild, troubling pictures, right? People with the medical masks, hordes of people coughing, looking ill, looking sick. And then they transitioned to the grocery stores, seeing these empty shelves, right? That in our mind can be traumatic in and of itself, right? When we don't know the symptoms. So if you have that cycling through your head, especially like at night when you have time to to sit and not be distracted by things during the day. If you catch yourself overthinking and it's keeping you up at night, then that's a hint that you're starting to kind of fall into the pit of the re-experiencing symptom of acute stress. Next is our avoidance. It's our desire to avoid whatever is bringing pain or struggle in our life. So it's avoiding activities, situations, people, places that are associated with, right now, I'm just going to keep using the example of the coronavirus. If we're avoiding to the extent that it's hurting us more than helping us, meaning you are isolating yourself in your room, you're not watching TV, you're not, engaging with your kids, or you're forcing your kids to do the same thing, and you're giving them no opportunity to, establish some normalcy in their life, then you've breached the threshold of helping, right? You've reached the threshold of appropriate and necessary. And that's where we got to check in with ourselves. And lastly is anxiety and increased arousal. I know I keep alluding to anxiety. I'm going to use that a lot here because I want you to know what it looks like in these situations, and if we are going beyond the realm of necessary and adaptable anxiety, when it becomes more dysfunctional, right? And when it starts to hurt us more than help us, essentially. So that anxiety and that stress, it can look like us obsessing over the news. It can look like us obsessing over washing our hands, obsess over of using the hand sanitizer, or having our kids and our loved ones doing these things. Like the other day, I had a client on of course video chat. He was telling me how he has pre-existing OCD, and this on top of that is exacerbating his symptom of anxiety. So we've been trying to do a lot of distress tolerance for him, creating ways where he can calm himself down so that those thoughts don't become so intrusive. But what happened was he was washing his hands so much that they became dry to the point where he was bleeding. Right? That in and of itself is showing us we've gone too far. Right? We've reached the threshold of appropriate at that point. But that's one of the symptoms here. Right? So we want to know what it looks like. Next, so if these symptoms start to persist more than a month, and then on top of that, you start to feel this disconnect, or this kind of cloudy, detached feeling from yourself, from others, from the situation that you're in, you kind of catch yourself daydreaming more than usual, then we've started to breach the threshold of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Right? And I get this question a lot. When is it time to seek professional help? The time is when we've creeped into that after a week scenario where we're still experiencing the re-experiencing, right? You're staying up at night, you're having those intrusive thoughts about the virus itself, about contracting it, health of your family, maybe finances. When that's still continuing, we want to really nip it in the butt there. The closer, it's just like any illness, the closer to the onset of the disorder or this experience itself, like the adverse traumatic experience, the closer to it, the quicker we're going to be able to get into recovery and start creating new adaptive ways to look at it. Because what happens is you create these beliefs about that experience, and those beliefs, whether they're adaptive or maladaptive, will ingrain themselves into our thinking patterns and our subconscious. And if we overlook them and we don't challenge them, we're not aware of them, and they're hurting us and they're creating dysfunction in our lives, then that's where they start to take over, and that's where we start to feel like we have this lack of control. All right. And of course, like I talked about earlier, anyone with pre-existing disorders, especially anxiety disorders like OCD or generalized anxiety, they're going to need more support than normal right now. Right? They're going to be the type of people that we want to make sure they have a healthy means of social engagement and people backing them up, and people that they can feel healthy and safe around. That's going to be very important right now. All right, so next, what we can and cannot control, right? What's actually worth our time and focus when taking responsibility for? I've noticed that this has been a very big disconnect and confusion for a lot of people because, like I said earlier, we don't really know the monster here. We don't know it well enough to say exactly what to do. We just have precautions and we have preventive measures that we can put in place. So what we cannot control. One, We cannot control the prognosis and the unforeseeable future of what this virus is going to mean. We can predict certain tendencies, certain trends. But what I've noticed is that when we start falling into searching for all that information, it starts pulling us away from grounding ourselves in what actually is worth our energy and thought. Next, school closings. Right, I know they've pushed it to April 27th, I believe now. So that's just something that is in place. We can't do anything about. We just simply have to go with the flow with that. Next, job security, right? Finances. Not everyone, and my heart goes out to all those people that are dealing and coping with this, but it's not something that we can say for firmity and for 100% it's going to be this way, right? There's still a lot of uncertainty there. And then cancellations, right? For the whole month of June and May, all my speaking engagements were canceled, right? It sucked. It was not fun. I had to do a lot of transitioning. I had to change the calendar around a little bit, but it's just the reality of the situation. It's our ability to jump into this radical acceptance, meaning we say it is what it is, and what can we do about it, and what can't we do about it. And lastly, our emotional response. Now, this one is always the one that throws a wrench to people because they think if we give into our emotion, or we identify our emotion, or we sit with it, then we're going to become the emotion, or we're start to be this person who only acts off emotion. Not the truth, right? In order to overcome an emotion, you've got to noticeable. You also have to accept that it is part of our basic physiological response to whatever is happening to ourselves or in our environment, right? So that's something we can't change. Now, what can we change? Now, you guys are going to know a lot of these different things, but I just kind of want to reiterate it, just so we can continue to reaffirm these things. One, the social distancing, right? Keeping that 6 feet of space between one another. The washing of hands, yes, when it's appropriate. That means touching anything that's been out in the public, right? I have a client right now that he washes his hands after he touches everything. That is too much, right? That's breaching the threshold of necessary. Want to be aware of that, right? Avoid touching the eyes, mouth, ears, face. This was tough for me because my urge is always to do the typical therapist stance of putting the hand on the face and then the thinker. But I had to check in with that, and I had to create more of an awareness as to not continue doing that, especially at this time. But yes, this is something we can do something about, right? Staying indoors, right? That social isolating, staying indoors to the point where it's necessary. We're not engaging with groups more than 10 people. Yes, being cognizant of that, but still getting outside, still breathing that fresh air. It's going to be paramount for our mental health at this time. Monitoring our time watching the news. We need to balance that. Know when it's appropriate to get the information and become informed, and when it's reaching the threshold of obsessive thinking and ruminating over it, and just like basically giving ourselves like an open forum to attach ourselves to all these different levels and stages of news and what's happening, what came to be, this, that, and the other. And know your resource. And right now, the one that I am suggesting and advocating for my clients to use is the CDC, right? The Center for Disease Control. That's the one that's given out the most recent research and credible information that you can find at this point. All right, so we want to be cognitive of those things, right? What is worth taking responsibility for at this time? All right, so how do we deal with a crisis? Like I said before, our brain interprets a crisis in 3 different ways. What can we take responsibility for, right? Where is our lack of security and safety? And then lack of control. What can we control and what can we not control? The brain fixates on those 3 things. So that's a little cue for what we should be aware of at this time. Now, the reason for this crisis, this one specifically, the reason that it's becoming so pervasive is because we're in this technological age where we have consistent availability to this information, but we're giving unlimited information about something that is still ongoing, that is still changing and evolving, right? It falls under this paradigm known as availability heuristic, meaning what's the available news that we keep filtering in to our brains. It's kind of like how a lot of people are afraid of flying. The reason being is because when we hear about flying or planes, it's always about them crashing, not about them landing safely. So that's why we continually create and we embed this belief that it's fearful and it's not safe, even though it is the safest means of travel in the entire world. So yes, being cognizant of that. Right. We also want to know when it's appropriate to take the time to sit with the reality of the situation and the facts, and when it is time to distract. Right? That's going to be huge in crisis situations. Any client that's going through an emotional crisis, they're feeling suicidal, right? Or they're questioning why they're living, what's the point of living, or they're questioning of hurting someone else, right? Homicidal tendencies and ideations. What we want to do is we want to basically swivel back and forth of sitting with those feelings, emotions, and thoughts, right? Trying to evaluate them and process them, and then finding time to distract ourselves, right? When you're in a panic state, you're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, we don't want to fixate on what we're feeling and what's happening to us in that moment. What we want to do is we want to distract ourselves. A great way to distract yourself in those times is being mindful of what's happening in your environment, right? Playing off your senses. 10 things you can see, few things you can smell, what you're hearing, right? What you're touching. It allows us to ground ourselves in those moments. And then when we've come to a stabilized, relaxed state, that's when we can think most clearly and rationally. Then we start thinking about it, right? So we want to know the difference, especially at this time where we're so vulnerable, and our family as well, right? Help your kids and your loved ones out with this also, right? Allowing them to sit down and having dialogue and conversation just like we're doing right now, but also knowing when it's appropriate to get out of that frame of thought and start doing some other things, some fun stuff or distracting stuff, or just things of the sort, which I will go over a little later in my talk. Next, how do we regulate the emotions, right? How do we develop a strategy for emotional stability, right? How do we regulate those emotions? Right now, like I said, miscalibrated emotions, which means our emotions, they don't really know what to do with the information that's being given to us. So they're running haywire. So what we can do are 4 different things, right? I like to go off of the acronym Tufts. When you're sitting with an emotional state, you want to check in with your thoughts firsthand, right? What are we thinking about? With the coronavirus, it's a lot of times it's the safety of ourselves, our loved ones, right? Whether we're going to contract it with the virus, what is this going to mean for society, for the world at large, for humanity, or what is this going to mean for me financially, for my job? We want to be aware of the thoughts because it's going to allow us to create an objective view to say this is something we're experiencing, that's something we're going through. Remember, we have close to 70,000 thoughts a day. We've got to teach ourselves how to monitor and discipline those thoughts so we can extricate the ones that are just out of like a fear response or anxiety, right? The ones that just are feeding off of that, and the ones that are stabilizing us, grounding us, right? Bringing us back to planet Earth. Like saying, okay, when I leave this bathroom, I can wash my hands, but that doesn't necessarily mean I need to walk around with a paper towel in my own house, right? Knowing the difference when it's necessary and when it's becoming obsessive. All right, next, identifying your urges. Like I was saying before, my urge is always to touch my face. But right now, it's not a good thing. It's not conducive for what's happening right now in our environment, in our society, for me to continue doing that. So what I do is I notice the urge when it comes on, and I sit with it and I allow it to pass. The medical community says with all urges, all impulses, they will not last more than 5 to 10 minutes. Rarely they're going to go to 10 minutes. If they go to 10 minutes, that's usually like an urge stemming from addiction, something really deep-seated. So it's really just giving ourselves the space and time to notice what our urges are in those moments. Like sometimes the urge is to turn on the news, right? Urges to hold our kids back from going outside, from obsessing over different forms of media, right? So we want to notice the urges and we want to look at the ones that are helping and the ones that are hurting. It's really just creating a mindful acceptance of the urge and let it ride out without acting upon it. That's what we're really educating ourselves for in that time, right? Next, our feelings. Again, kind of like something I said earlier, people think that if we give into our feelings, if we name them, if we start to sit with them, then we're going to become them. Not the truth. It's actually the opposite. what happens, again, you create an objective view and standpoint from your feeling, saying, this is something I'm going through and experiencing. It's not who I am. You know, by definition, a feeling is something that's fleeting, right? And by definition, an emotion, it's just simply a physical response, body response to what's happening in our environment, right? It allows us to detect what is hurting us, what is rewarding for us, and everything in between. So it's very useful when we can use it effectively and actually look at it, as opposed to just avoid and distract, because that's our normal inclination and urge to do, is just to push it underneath the rug. But what happens when we do that? It'll pile up. And then eventually will displace itself and project itself on our loved ones, or, you know, we'll turn it inward, or, you know, people at work, this, that, and the third, right? So we want to be aware of that. It's creating like mindful acceptance of these different parts of ourselves. And lastly, your physical sensations, right? What's happening on your bodily level. You know, a lot of people, when they get anxious, their heart will start racing, or their chest will feel heavy, right? Their hands will shake, or they roll their shoulders forward and they get all this tension in their upper shoulders, or you get this warm sensation in your face. I want you to just notice it, understand it, and accept that it's happening. Once you start accepting it, that's going to open up the threshold for it to start changing. And you can do things in the moment, right? You can do like light stretches, especially for your neck. If you get a lot of tension in your neck, just little neck rolls throughout the day. That's going to be monumental for releasing the stress. I had one client that didn't realize anytime that he was like in a situation that was confusing or on a little bit of frustration, he would scowl his face, and that was creating tension headaches for him. So once we realized that, once we were able to identify that was happening, he had better awareness of it and was able to release the stress and the kind of that tightness in his face in those moments, so it didn't evolve into the headaches, right? So it's going to be very helpful when we create that awareness of it. All right, so now this is where I want you to take out a pen and paper. These are the things that you can do when you're at home, right? With your kids, taking time for yourself, or managing other family members who may be at your house, this, that, and the third, and what we can do for ourselves. Take care of ourselves and our family at this time of, like I said, confusion and uncertainty, where things feel haywire. Really what we're doing here is we're trying to create a new normal for ourselves, right? Because we want normalcy back in our lives. So one, you want to limit the news intake. I kind of alluded to this earlier, right? Monitor how much news you're taking in and what news is credible. Next, practicing calming techniques. Breathing techniques are going to be big. Teaching your kids, especially the young ones, to breathe from their stomach and not their chest. That's deeper breathing, and then it massages your central nervous system and it calms down the body, right? Also doing, taking a warm bath, playing with a pet, or meditation. Good. Two really awesome apps for meditation are Calm and Breathe, right? Those are things that you can start using today, right? I had a client the other day who needs to start becoming more aware of his feelings, emotions, and what's happening in his body. And I just suggested 2 minutes of just checking in with his breath. Next, moving our body, right? Got to exercise. I'm a guy that loves the gym. Gyms are not a resource for me now. So I got to start doing these at-home workouts. I've been doing this beach body thing. It's P90X. It's still get that intensity and you get the sweat. But that's going to feel good because when you exercise, it releases serotonin. That is our mood stabilizing neurochemical that we need for stability in our lives, in our emotions, in our physical body, right? That'll calm us down as well, right? So this is taking walks. This is doing yoga. We're doing like 15, 20 minutes of push-ups and sit-ups. Next, finding activities that give you joy. The other day, I was talking with a good friend of mine, Luke Justin Roberts. He's a musician in the area, and he was talking about doing these live concerts, and he ended up doing it, and it was so cool. Of course, you're not there in person, but it felt like you were still engaging with his music. It was live. It was raw. It was awesome. And even in Berlin, right in Germany, they're doing these Berlin Philharmonic symphonies in front of an empty arena, I guess you could say. But this was free to to all public. So being aware of those kinds of things, right? Next, connecting with loved ones, right? Doing game nights, baking together, cooking meals together. It's going to be huge, right? This is time to really engage and take time to reconnect with maybe family members that you lost touch with, or friends you lost touch with. A friend of Joy and I's was telling us about this happy hour, Zoom happy hour she was doing with a bunch of her friends, where they all got on Zoom and they're drinking wine and they're enjoying their time. Right? We got to make use of our resources now. Next, getting stuff done. Right? Getting stuff done. Doing some spring cleaning. Getting those clothes that don't fit our kids anymore, us anymore, putting that in a bag, donating that, right? That's gonna feed into our charitable side. That's gonna feel good to give back, of course, right? Or getting to those projects that we wanted to do, the projects, or putting together that album, or I'm sorry, those old photos, doing something like that. Just projects that you got too busy, you got too caught up in life to take time to do. This is a really good time to engage with that kind of stuff, right? And then lastly, finding ways to laugh. I know we all have that friend that gives us that comic relief. I got a buddy that I was talking to the other day that he's 100% that for me. And we were talking for about 15, 20 minutes, and I completely lost sight of everything that's happening in our environment, society, just because I had that moment of time with him, just to laugh, just to be, right? Also, this is, specials, comedy specials on Netflix, funny TV shows, or funny, those two things, and funny movies, right? Movie night with the kids, implement stuff that you can laugh about. And last, this is going to be my finishing thought. I know I'm kind of speeding through this. It's because I got a lot of information that I really want to send to you guys, but just a closing thought is going to be, I want you to know we are more resourceful than we believe, right? When we come to times of peril and crisis, we're going to tap in with a part of ourself that is going to be able to navigate through situations that it's not used to. It's adaptive quality that we have as human beings. That's why we've evolved to this standpoint, right? But in saying that and knowing that we're going to be able to be resourceful no matter what, right? No matter the times it's changing, that we've been through the Great Depression, wars, all that stuff. This is also a really good time to slow things down, right? We want to kind of reaffirm those things that we lost touch with in the past, or maybe that disconnecting relationship with your kids, or that book that you haven't picked up in a while. But it's going to allow us to cool the jets a little bit, because we live in a society where everything's so fast paced. And when everything's so fast paced, it just breeds anxiety, high levels of stress, and just inappropriate levels of coping. Right? It takes us to realms where the human brain shouldn't be at least yet. So we want to come back to things. We want to calm ourselves down, calm our family down by knowing what is most important right now, right? What's most important. Last little thing, there was a 75-year longitudinal study, right? So picture that, 75 years this study was done over time. And it tried to find out what facets and variables led to the most life satisfaction and fulfillment. They looked at money, they looked at political stance, they looked at social status, they looked at wealth, they looked at poverty, all these different things. And the thing that was most significant above all else was quality time with others and family. So that is a stance, and that is evidence to say that we, just because maybe the job is in question, or that school is in question, we still have that underlining resource for ourselves that's going to bring us back home, and it's going to give us some stability. All right, everyone, thank you so much for your time. And again, if we get to the point where your friends, family need to reach out to your doctor or your therapist, we have resources on our website, cmhahelps.com, or you can give us a call at 410-756-0035, and we'd be happy to help, even just a quick consultation, and give you some education here and there. All right, thank you guys so much. I guess now we can open up for questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Sal. That was fantastic. I think one thing that really just kind of hits home for me, I really love that you touched on the balance of both sitting with it and processing the emotion, and then the distraction. I feel like a lot of people struggle with where they're too heavy on one side of that, where they're, either sitting with it for too long, or they're just, like you said, like they're in that distraction mode, and they're not allowing themselves to really process what's going on underneath. So I loved that you kind of created that balance, with the focus here. And I also wanted to acknowledge too, This is a great kind of setup for our next session that's actually going to be happening next Saturday morning. We're going to have a session all around breath work with one of our other wellness practitioners. And so there'll be information coming out about that. So save the date. That'll be next Saturday, 9:30 in the morning. But she's going to do a guided breathwork session with us. So that'll be a great coping technique. So I just wanted to comment on those two things. And I do want to clarify real quick before we take questions. Sal, I think you had also mentioned too, that you do have some spots because we know some people are in really tough scenarios right now with their employment, and maybe have even already been laid off, or they're being furloughed, whatnot. So you do have a sliding scale option, correct, for those that need that?
Yeah, so right now I'm going to allot time on Sundays from 2 to 6 to basically just do free consultations and to get a psych assessment as to where they're at and if it's turning into acute stress or PTSD, or just pervasive anxiety that they need just a few skills, techniques, and strategies to help cope and deal with everything.
Awesome. That's so great. Very generous of you, and I know a timely need for many. And real quick again before questions, I do want to mention too that we are going to be putting out a follow-up survey after this, basically just to gauge the interest and need for additional sessions with Sal, as well as for other efforts that we're putting together with Life of Joy. So just keep a lookout for that. So we'll go ahead and open it up for questions. You can either come on screen, or if you want to use the chat box, you can submit a question that way. So anybody have any questions or comments?
Chat box.
Yeah, there's a little button
Okay,
that says chat if you hover down at the bottom there, and that's how you can open up your chat box.
Well, I also want everyone to know that if you don't feel comfortable asking questions on this platform, you can always email me at sal@cmhahelps.com. Yeah, spelled all normal.
Perfect.
All right.
Anybody have any questions or comments before we hop off?
Pretty good, huh?
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much for tuning in and joining us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Sal or to us. You can also email us at info@lifeofjoy.org or lifeofjoyfoundation.org. If you have any questions, and we're happy to forward that on to Sal as well. Or if it's a question for us, we'll be sure to get back to you. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, and please take care of yourselves and try to find that balance.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Sal.
Thank you, guys. Take care. Have a great rest of your week.